It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. So, Al, let me start with you. As you know, there's quite a tradition for political analysts and later historians to look critically at a president's first 100 days in office and evaluate their success or failure. Joe Biden is getting that kind of treatment these days after his 100 days. And the safe thing to say is he's not been that passive president that we anticipated as a transitional figure. He's moving forward quite rapidly on a couple of fronts. What's your assessment now of the president? What might it say about his future?
Well, I think Joe Biden, as you said, is off to a very fast start. A lot of people thought he was going to be a sort of transitional president. He seems to be set out to want to become a transformational president, and he's well on his way. Just think about what's happened in the last 100 days. He came in the midst of another surge in COVID. President Trump had led the development of the vaccine, but he had no plan to put shots in arms. President Biden came in and has more than doubled his initial promise and has had 220 million shots in arms, vaccinations. He's cut the hospitalization rate. The case rate is slowly going down, not as low as we'd like, probably. Death rates are going down to a point where we can safely reopen, and as Governor Hogan is going to be doing in Maryland this week, reducing the mask requirements. He came in with the economy faltering and unemployment claims again rising. Now the economy seems to be back on track. He said last night he added 1.3 million jobs over the first 3 months. I think that's actually a low estimate. I think there's another month to add in these first 100 days. So it's probably going to be close to 2 million new jobs. Unemployment claims weekly have been going down in the last couple of weeks. Just a few minutes ago, the first quarter growth was announced at 1.6%, which is 6.4 annual rate, pretty spectacular. And at the rate we're going, we're likely to reach the pre-pandemic levels by the summer. He came in amidst daily chaos and havoc wreaked by his predecessor on the heels of a insurrection at the Capitol, sacking of the Capitol that was inspired by the former president. And he's returned a sense of normalcy, calm, a civilized tone to national politics. And legislatively, he's passed his COVID relief plan, which is really a almost $2 trillion domestic economic stimulus bill, and which already seems to be doing some good, but is really a major accomplishment in the first 100 days. To me, I'd call that a domestic grand slam if I were at Nats Park. He stood up to the Russians. He's offered a transformational economic and family plans to sort of build the economy of the future and for us to battle the Chinese for economic supremacy. So as he said last night, I think America is back. But if you look ahead, the job isn't finished, and it's probably not going to be as easy in the next 100 days as it was in the last. The pandemic lingers, so he's still going to have to deal with that. His economic infrastructure program and his family plan would add another $4 trillion to the $2 trillion he's already spent. And I can't believe that isn't going to run into some roadblocks in Congress on both sides. I think in the end, he's going to have to focus on specific elements, maybe childcare, rebuilding roads, whatever they are. But he's going to have to decide what he really wants to do to get the kind of support he needs to pass it in the Congress. He's got the immigration crisis, which every president has. He's going to have to deal with the policing situation and police reform. And to me, he's got the biggest challenge of all is to preserve our democracy and guarantee people can vote easily, safely, and honestly. So those are big challenges, but he's off to a good start. I thought his speech last night was terrific. Maybe a little heavy on the promises, but that's what States of the Union are about. But the tone was terrific. He reached out in his tone to the Republicans, if not in the substance. But still, as he goes ahead, it's going to be tougher, but I think he's got the country going on the right track.
Greg, what's your assessment? Is he moving too fast for your comfort?
I don't think he's moving too fast. I've thought from the outset that the two most important things that he had to do and had to communicate with the American people about was the economy, getting the economy moving, and obviously dealing with the pandemic. And on both fronts, he, as Al points out, has done well. Thus, he's receiving very strong approval clearly from Democrats, pretty strong approval from independents, which now gives you well over 50% of the American voting public, and even some support among Republicans. I think the most important thing is he hasn't lost focus, while he's also been able to deal with the many issues that come to a White House and to a president. There's some things that have not happened that are maybe worth noting, and one is that the Republican Party doesn't seem to have found its footing in the first 100 days. There's still schizophrenia throughout the party about do you go to Mar-a-Lago and try to make nice with the former president to raise money, but hope that perhaps he doesn't get out there too publicly and create more problems? Do you move away from him? Those questions are still very much with the Republican Party, and I don't think they found a way really to effectively either work against him in Congress or work with him in Congress, which in a way is a shame. I think some members have tried and are hopeful, but they're not strong enough, or they don't represent a large enough block of votes to actually drive policy the way they'd like. I actually do think that the quote bipartisan approach is aimed more at the American public than the people sitting in the halls of Congress, and I think that's probably smart. I found the speech last night, perhaps I wouldn't give it as glowing a comment as some of my friends on the Democratic side or some in the media, but I think it was such a change from the ranting that we'd seen that it was probably pretty well received by a lot of people. And the fact that President Biden can stand there, deliver a speech of over an hour, or touch as many topics as he touched, I think is another interesting development in the 100 years. This is not someone who is slowing down, backing away, and shying away from the issues we face. And he kind of lays out almost in a lecture style his views on where we are as a country, where we are as a people, what we need to accomplish. And so I think that plays well. I like Al, agree that the next 100, 200 days is where the really tough part starts, and where the work to get these measures through Congress start. I still think that, and I think we used the term one time a few weeks ago, that these proposals are huge, but they're almost too big to fail. In other words, something's going to get done. He's not probably going to get as much of the spending as he wants. He probably won't get as much of the tax increases on the rich that he wants, but something's going to get done. And for him, getting things done before you get into next year and these midterm elections is certainly very politically important. Also, to be honest, it's important for the nation. And this economic growth number we're seeing is very encouraging. You found me this morning early out in California, where all of a sudden the stories are that there's fewer hospitalizations for COVID. We've not only turned the corner, it's one of the best states in the nation suddenly. People are at restaurants. The airplane was full flying out. People who are vaccinated are traveling and shopping, and Maryland has announced that no more masks outside. So there is a sense that as a nation we've gotten ahead of this horrible pandemic, and economic growth is following. Again, I'll end where I started. I think those are the two most important factors for President Biden going forward.
Craig, let me stay with you. It's kind of hard to decide if one needs to laugh or cry that a GOP-led 2020 election recount is taking place in Arizona. Earlier this week, Republicans were able to collect nearly 2 million ballots cast in the state's largest county, and they are now sitting on the floor of a coliseum there and being looked after by private companies, not the government. When does all this madness end? When do we close the chapter on 2020?
You said it's hard to know whether to laugh or cry. I kind of yawn. I just think to myself, what is possibly relevant about this activity? It's not going to change the election. It's not going to do anything other than be kind of an irritation. It's a private company, a cyber company that has no experience doing this work. Is it really going to be taken seriously even by people in Arizona? I doubt it. I doubt that it's going to have an effect nationally. But I do think, to your point, I do think it kind of perpetuates this story. And it goes to what I was saying is, if this is what the Republican Party in a state, if this is the best they can come up with as a path forward, I just don't think they're going to find a very strong following. And I fear for the party I've been a part of for a long time, that some are interested in playing only to a small faction within the party. It may be a faction in some congressional races and some Senate races that can get nominated a very conservative candidate to run. But I don't think that's the path forward to reaching back to a majority in either the House or the Senate. Time will tell on that. But I think it's more of an irritant than anything that should be taken too seriously.
Al, what's your sense of it? I do know that I believe over 50% of registered Republicans do believe that the 2020 election was rigged. I mean, where do we go with this?
I'm baffled by the Republicans and the Republican leadership. They're so close to having a chance to win the Congress in 2022. You think they'd step out and try to really get in the fight for it. Look, what's happening in Arizona is symptomatic of what's happening, I think, to the party just generally. It's looking backwards. It's fighting the last battle. The war's over. Joe Biden just celebrated his 100th day in office with a speech to a joint session of Congress. What are they fighting the 2020 election for? Arizona is complete nonsense. I mean, it's done by the president of the Senate in state Senate because they still have a majority. Now, maybe she ought to look at the reality of the last two US Senate races and say, we better do a little better than trying to pretend we won elections that we lost. And they've hired a company that is known for believing conspiracy theories from Florida to apparently count the ballots. I read a piece in an Arizona newspaper last night that said so far they've gone through 121,000 of the 2.1 million ballots, and they haven't found any to be thrown out. The contrast with last night is so incredible. Here, you can disagree with the details of what Biden said, but he offered this plan for the future to transform our country. And on the other hand, the Republicans are trying to relitigate the last campaign. The country is changing dramatically and rapidly. They're trying to halt the change, whether it's voter suppression bills. They just constantly look backward. And yesterday, incidentally, there may be the beginnings of something that will force the country to look a little bit backward with the U.S. Attorney's raid of Rudy Giuliani. We'll see how glorious the last 4 years were with the president's lawyer. But what the Republicans are doing now, since they haven't offered any serious alternatives and they keep just trying to relitigate 2020, is they've given Joe Biden an open field to define the debate and to frame it. And so he's last night talking jobs, jobs. He's proposing tax increases, but he framed it last night in a way that probably most Americans say that's not such a bad idea. We don't need 55 rich corporations who don't pay any taxes. But because Republicans are deciding in Arizona whether or not that the 2020 election was legitimate, he has a free field to define this on his terms, and that's going to make their battle harder as they get ahead. Having said all that, they're very close in the Senate and in the House, and if history it tells us anything, they're probably going to win both bodies in 2022, and they should prepare for that, because the only way they can lose it is if they're still fighting 2020 in the 2022 election.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, always a pleasure. Thanks so much. See you next week.